Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle and I'm joined this week, pleased to say as ever, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian and senior fellow, Amy Gallagher of This Manor and Stand Up to Woke, and Dr. Philip Kiszely, senior fellow, cultural historian. Now, first things first, before we go on, I just want to ask you, Amy, you had a victory. Yes. Which I want you to share with our viewers recently.
Yeah, so I was invited to speak at the Durham University Debate Society. It was about the puberty blockers being banned and whether they should be reversed. So I was on the side of, I was on the opposition, so I was saying they shouldn't be reversed. And I was speaking with a Tory MP and one of the students, and we won. We got 50 votes to 30. So yeah, it was good. It was a very good experience. Yeah.
Bravo. Well done.
Well done. Yeah, it's brilliant. Yes. And now, Rafe, we've got some locals news somewhere.
We do just 3 events to round up the month. So if you are in or around Birmingham, Edinburgh or Canterbury, pay attention, because on Sunday the 24th at 7 p.m. we'll be in Birmingham with Tom Bowen. Some of you will remember from his appearances here. He's a co-founder of the King Alfred School, which is Britain's first Christian classical education school. It's a wonderful project. He'll be talking all about that. And in Edinburgh on Friday the 29th at 6 p.m. there'll be an informal meetup where they'll be discussing the topic of a manifesto for a European Renaissance, which sounds intriguing and fascinating. And then on the 30th of November, which is St. Andrew's Day and Winston Churchill's 150th anniversary of his birth, in Canterbury at 7 p.m. on the 30th, Connor Tomlinson, co-host of our own The Programme show with Harrison Pitt, he'll be there giving a talk. So do come to one of those events if you're there. They're all free of charge, completely free, and a great chance to also meet some kindred spirits from the local community. Do email locals@newcultureforum.org.uk. That's locals@newcultureforum.org.uk.
Thanks, Rafe. Excellent things there. Also, before we go on, this is starting to sound like one of those notice boards, but I think it's proof of our increased activity. Last weekend, we got to 300,000 subscribers on this channel. Great. And I think it's great. When we started out, I remember I was thrilled that we got 12,000 views. No, 12,000 views at the very, very beginning. I'll never forget that. And I think now we've got getting on for 40 million or something like that. But anyway, 300,000. So well done. Congratulations. Anyway, back to what a week. First of all, Philip, it seems that according to various reports coming out, the future is looking very, very, very bleak for Muslims in the UK.
Yes, this is a report by the Runnymede Trust, who I think we've come across before. And this says, essentially, it projects into the future. It takes a statistic which says 38% of reported religious-based hate crime it's Muslims who are reporting it, and they supposedly are the victims. So this then takes religion, conflates it ridiculously with race, and projects into the future and says it's all going to be terrible. There are going to be racist riots like the racist riots we've seen. This is the language they're using. It's extraordinary. And we must do all we can to stop this dystopian future. So this is, this is a charitable trust just about being as divisive and inflammatory as you can possibly be, and just throwing the racism card around like there's no tomorrow. Now let's just think about the statistics for a minute. That 38% of hate crimes, religious-based hate crimes, so this is 4 million Muslims. There are actually 33% of hate crimes leveled at Jews, and there are only 200,000 Jews about in this country. So the story isn't about Islamophobia, it's about gross anti-Semitism. But this is taking a statistic, not only removing it from religion and ideology, which Islam is, but framing it as race and Islamophobia.
Yeah.
It's awful, but that's where we are. And there's no context, why are people concerned about Islam and Islamism? What's going on? Are there hate marches every week? Are there grooming gangs? Are there terror attacks? Is there some reason why people might be concerned? None of that. It's just this thing in the air that is, we're all Islamophobic, we're all terrible, and this is what happens.
It's a sort of sense in which they say Islamophobic kind of dialogue has been mainstreamed. And they say politicians, which I don't know what world they're living in, but apparently this is what they're saying.
Well, let's just remember, the Runnymede Trust are the people who brought in the term Islamophobia into this country. They used a term that was created by the Muslim Brotherhood, the organization that gave birth to Hamas and to Hezbollah and to the PLO and everything else. And Islamophobia this term was deliberately created by radical Muslims to silence debate, to silence any criticism of the religion of Islam. And that has become embedded in our culture because of the Runnymede Trust. And so at best, they are useful idiots for Islamic extremism. At worst, they are actually complicit in the elevation and the protection of the most vile form of religious extremism in this country. And they've allowed it, because of this, the sensitivities that they have entrenched, they've allowed it to run amok through our mosques and through our society. We don't know how many of these Islamophobic crimes are real crimes. How many of these things are perceived microaggressions or whatever these things are? That's one thing to say. What is a crime today? It's a very loose definition, it seems to me. And additionally to that, of course, the solution is not with the rest of society. The solution to the issue is within the Islamic community, and none of that is addressed. Sort out your own house before you start condemning other people. Integration, stopping segregated communities, teaching them tolerance and respect for British values, and a robust assertion of Western culture, Western values, Western principles, and Western freedoms.
Well, do you think this is a load of rubbish?
Yeah, I mean, the term Islamophobia is just complete nonsense. When you look on the Labour Party website, it defines Islamophobia as a form of racism targeted at Muslims, which is called Muslims are not race. It's a belief system. And then it goes on to say that this could include things like saying that Muslims are more likely to commit terrorist attacks, or saying that Muslims are a threat to European culture and society. These things are just objectively true. So essentially what Islamophobia means, and when this person from the Runnymede Trust says, derogatory comments about Islam or Muslims, what she means is just criticisms of Islam and Muslims. No belief system and no group of people are above criticism. And there are a lot of criticisms to be made of Islam and Muslims. I mean, as we've just seen, this is about shutting down criticism. And you need to look at the subtext of this. When they say, we're very worried there's going to be more riots, what they mean is we're worried there's going to be another terrorist attack. More children are going to be killed by a Muslim extremist, and people will be angry about that. Well, rightly so. They should be angry about that. So they're preempting the fact that the behaviour in this community, the Muslim community, is going to get worse, and people will feel angry about them. That's what it's about.
There's a separate survey, I think it's a separate one, saying that Muslims definitely think that since October the 7th last year, and also Southport, that there's been a huge rise.
Yeah, I mean, just to get back to the Runnymede thing very, very briefly, this report is supported by discredited organisations like Amnesty International as well. So it isn't just one organisation, as Rafe rightly says, or either very poisonous or complete useful idiots. It's all of them working together, and this is what we always have when we're up against this idea of Islamophobia. But yes, there's this second report as well. So all of these things are happening at once, and when that happens, I always think, well, what are they trying to deflect from here? What's been going on this week? It's always the same, isn't it? There's a report coming out and other things are happening, but we are, forced down this avenue of no, let's think about Islamophobia, because we really need to put the emphasis there and take it away from other places, which we'll probably be talking about later on.
I mean, there's a lot. This is spreading into all sorts of different issues, obviously, at the moment. I mentioned there the Southport attacks. Again, we're all talking about it in different kind of ways, aren't we? In different channels and all of that.
And in code half the time.
Yes, but at the same time, also, you know, having to be very careful about what we say. You on Dan Wootton, weren't you, about this just last night, I think, wasn't it, Rafe? This is, again, a situation where we are hearing certain bits of information, and then you have to sort of make the judgment, is this sub judice or not?
Well, let's be clear here. It's not sub judice. This all goes back to this ridiculous situation we have in this country where you're not allowed to make any comment on any aspect of a case for fear of prejudicing the trial. You don't find this in other countries. And unfortunately, this principle is used and abused by politicians to avoid answering awkward questions. And it's an easy escape because it's not sub judice to ask what our Prime Minister, what our Home Secretary, and what the police knew about this suspect's possession of allegedly of our Al-Qaeda material, of the production of ricin in the house. It's not sub judice to ask what they knew and when they knew it. And of course, the sub judice didn't stop Keir Starmer and the Home Secretary from calling the protesters far-right thugs, didn't stop the Home Office from deeming them criminals before they were actually convicted. So the idea that they can't comment on these aspects is ridiculous. But what's happening now, we've had Nigel Farage give an interview with Winston Marshall in which he said, I can't go into the full details, but this is the biggest cover-up we've ever seen. Now we've had Lewis Brackpool, who we've had on this channel before. He's an independent journalist. He's had conversations with Tommy Robinson, and Tommy Robinson has alleged, because he's in the same prison at Belmarsh as this suspect, Axel Radikobana, and has said that this chap allegedly is attending mosque inside prison. Now, we were all told he was a Welsh choir boy. What's going on here, right? So when you combine what we do, he has been charged with possession of Al-Qaeda and ricin. And if you have these allegations, this is explosive stuff, because if it turns out that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary knew about this stuff, whilst at the same time condemning those people who were protesting for actually speaking the truth, people went to prison for saying things that are actually
died in prison as well.
Died for all of this. And of course, they said it wasn't a terrorist incident. If they knew that it was a terrorist incident when actually they said it wasn't, I think this is a scandal which in normal times would bring down a Prime Minister and a Home Secretary.
When you say normal times, this is an interesting point. What is abnormal now? I mean, I'm not being facetious here.
Yeah.
Have we accepted a situation now for good?
It's a morally bankrupt society we live in, and this goes back long before this government. Look at the Tory government under Boris Johnson. You know, there were so many scandals which would have led to ministerial resignations, and it just passes by.
I think one of the things is that the news feed now is so quick, and you live in this social media society that well, we kind of didn't do 10 years ago. It was different 10 years ago. It was slower. And as Rafe says, this moral bankruptcy dominates every single debate. And we're getting used to as I've just said, being manipulated. And the danger is, because we already do it, we scream and shout and we say, this is Orwellian, this is you're talking in newspeak and all of that kind of thing. But then something else happens and we're on to the next story. This might be slightly different in a way that if it is what we think it is, it's so huge that people cannot go on to the next story, because the next story just cannot be as big. The final point I want to make is that they keep doing this. They keep trying to just keep a cover on what's going on, keep a sense of stopping society exploding like a pressure cooker. But that very tactic, the methodology, is making it all worse. You can feel it when you're out in the streets. You can feel it on social media. People are so fed up. They don't like being treated like idiots. It makes people much more angry, and it stokes fear as well, because what are they covering up?
Well, yes, I would agree with that. But I still think a lot of people, a huge number of people, are simply not aware or indifferent.
Yeah.
And this is, I've said it on, I know it's not helpful.
But
Do you sense that? I mean, I meet people all the time and say, "Oh, what's that about?"
the paradox is in the interview that Nigel Farage gave to Winston Marshall. In one breath, he was saying that there's this huge cover up; it's the biggest cover up ever, and then he goes on to say, "Look, the Reform Party need to be on side with Muslims and Islam. Muslims every 10 years, the Muslim population is growing by 75%. We can't alienate them." So you see how, people who are very concerned, even people like Nigel Farage, will then quickly say, well, but we have to submit to this. So essentially, we are just managing this problem now. There's no political will to stop it from happening. I still think you could intervene now and stop it from happening. According to the 2021 census, there is 3.9 million Muslims in the UK, which is 6.5%. I feel like you could still do something now to stop kind of the total transformation of our country. But even with people like Nigel Farage, there isn't the will there. So I feel people have just resided to things getting worse and things needing to be managed more.
He said, didn't he? Just for fairness' sake, he said, if we alienate political Islam. It was rather confused, I have to say.
Yes, it was, yeah.
But if we alienate political Islam, we will lose. At which point, Winston Marshall brought out these statistics, which we've done many times, about what Muslims think about certain things, which was a kind of manful attempt to actually question Nigel, but it was sort of essentially allowed to rest. We will lose. So what would losing look like in that situation?
I mean, the problem here was that the Reform Party don't come out and clearly say what their policies are here. So all that we're left with is Nigel Farage speaking off the cuff, and what he says on one podcast to another varies, and therefore we're all left in the dark about it. And it sows doubt in our minds about what's really going on. And it will be so much easier if the Reform Party just actually came out with some policy platforms. And you can sort of see what he's saying about Islam, but what he should be saying is we must never allow any of our freedoms to take second fiddle to people's religious sensitivities. We must have a robust defense of freedom of expression that includes displaying an image of Muhammad, that includes, being able to burn a Quran if you want. You need to actually come out and say, we will not in any way take the knee to any religion, but at the same time, we fully understand that there are millions of Muslims in this country who go about their lives who are integrated and don't cause any trouble at all, and we mustn't alienate that group of the population or get their children radicalized. Yeah. So there is a way to deal with this. Unfortunately, what he's doing is just creating a situation now where it seems as if Reform is a complete outlier compared to every right-wing party in Europe, compared to Donald Trump. And, in many respects, Reform is to the left of some mainstream politicians on the continent now, and that's not good for a party that's trying to actually unite the right when people are desperate for someone to actually do what Trump is doing.
Yeah, and even a party like the SDP is actually outflanking Nigel on the right. I mean, I'm thinking about this, and Amy mentioned demographics. So it's 75% over 10 years. Doubling over 12 years, basically. I'm thinking back to a policy exchange report from a few years ago. Do you remember that? It's not just about demographics. It's also the direction of travel in terms of extremism, and the key demographic within that demographic is the young men, isn't it? And that policy exchange report sets out very clearly that young Muslim men are becoming far more radicalized. They are much, much more radicalized than their parents and grandparents. And it's that I was thinking about that when I heard Nigel speak, and I was really quite alarmed and thinking, wow, you're giving up on this.
Well, no, that's one thing he said, isn't it? About he went to the media quite some time ago, talking about these young men who support jihad.
Yeah.
And he got into, he said, I got it in the neck and everything. Well, the fact is, we've been talking about this for a long time.
Sorry, just to make the point there, just to come back on that. Yes, he did say that, but as Rafe said before, he's saying all sorts of different things on different platforms, and it feels as though Reform need to have some kind of policy on this that makes sense. Because bearing in mind, he just talked about immigration a few weeks ago, hadn't he? And that alarmed people as well,
I mean, the statistics around young men were that around a third of 18 to 24-year-old Muslim men believe that apostates should be killed. Around a third of Muslim men aged 18 to 24 believe that women must always obey their husbands. So there is an issue with young Muslim men, but we've also know from polling that it is a more broader problem among Muslims in general. This idea of the kind of majority of Muslims are very tolerant and they're peace-abiding. Actually, we know that 50% of Muslims believe that homosexuality should be made illegal. We know that 50% of Muslims believe that free speech should be restricted in favour of not criticising their religious beliefs. We know that 50% of Muslims believe that showing a picture of Muhammad should be illegal, and it goes on and on. So it is actually quite a large group of these 4 million, well, probably more now, Muslims that are living in the UK who have very intolerant beliefs. And it is the paradox of tolerance. We're being told by people like the Runnymede Trust that we need to be very tolerant of people who are very intolerant themselves. And then they briefly mention anti-Semitism. You think, well, where is all the anti-Semitism coming from? We know that a very large proportion of Muslims don't believe that the Hamas attacks even happened. They believe
75%.
Yes, I mean, this is extraordinary. And recently, even this week, we saw a Berlin police chief essentially tell Jews and gay people that in order to stay safe, they shouldn't go to Arab or Muslim communities within Germany. This is the bigger problem. And, we've seen Jew hunts in Amsterdam recently, and it goes on. I mean, it's just shocking what we're seeing. So the brazenness of coming out and saying, "Oh, don't be Islamophobic." I don't know how anybody could come out and say that. I mean, it's so insulting to so many victims of this belief.
I think the great fear here is that in its attempt to professionalize itself, Reform thinks that it needs to water down its message. And of course, the lesson of the right in Europe and America is that's precisely what you don't do. People are crying out for an alternative to what we call the Uniparty and trying to, court votes from Tories who would otherwise vote Lib Dem is not the way you go about doing that.
That's even if they've thought about it, that deeply. Actually, I think a lot.
Oh, I think they have.
About watering down.
Yeah, I think this is a key issue here. I mean, Reform is trying to become a very serious party, which I absolutely applaud, and many of the things that they've done, I applaud. And I think that they've had serious thoughts about the strategy here. And I just happen to think that they risk alienating the core voters who got them where they are by trying to professionalize and make themselves Westminster friendly. And that's precisely what you want to be, a disruptor. That's the whole raison d'etre of it. And there are enough votes there because you got to remember the margins are so small into so many constituencies, biting at the heels of Labour. Just this farming issue alone, I'm sure, would have gotten many more seats for the Reform Party if you had the general election right now, for example.
We're going to talk about that actually in a minute. But before we do, when people like Nigel, not just Nigel actually, I mean, people have been saying it on social media a lot earlier than him, that there is something very big about this cover-up. I mean, there's one particular theory that's going around, which obviously I can't repeat, but basically now we're being told this actually is not the case. This is not this, but it's actually something possibly bigger than that. So, I mean, it's going on and on and on. And the thing is that the worry is, as I think we've just said, is that supposing it was something that could bring down a government or a prime minister or whatever, is there the will to carry through with that? Because all the agents of all the messengers and all the agents and the parties and everything around are all basically not on our side. This is the worrying thing. You're not ever just fighting an election, are you? Wouldn't it be so much easier if you were just fighting an election? You're not. You're fighting the whole thing, aren't you?
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because Winston Marshall, who interviewed Nigel, he put on Twitter, the cover up, once it's exposed, will change Britain forever. And I was thinking, well, arguably Britain has already changed forever. I mean, and this idea of there being a kind of a line where this is the point, this is the thing that will change everything. I don't know if that point will ever come. I don't think it's like that. I think we are just in sort of managed decline, actually. And I don't think I often think what would have to happen for people to change their minds. And sometimes I think actually, I don't think anything could. Sometimes that's how I.
Well, I suppose what you could say is therefore what we need is a political party which is actually going to abide by every single one of what things we've just said. I don't mean to be corny about this, but not unlike our 10 pledges in our state of emergency.
There's nothing corny about it at all. That's why we wrote them.
Exactly. But I mean, or self-serving or anything like that. 10 pledges, well backed up, very, very welcomed at the time. But basically, you've got to give people something to vote for. And you've just got to have people who are willing to say what we said in our pledges.
Yeah. And I think reform can be their vehicle. This is not to sort of come down like a ton of bricks on reform. It's just, there's still very early stages for them, but they need to wake up to the fact. For example, there was data just came out recently showing that young men, well, not just young men, men under 44 are more likely to vote for Trump than they are to vote for the Reform Party by a huge margin. Many more men are willing to vote for Trump, because they understand that's the sort of, masculine, well-defined principles and policies of a party that they cleave to. And we're missing a trick there. We are, as I say, we are the complete outlier in the Western world amongst right-wing parties.
Yeah, and hopefully, my God, that can change, because Amy talks about managed decline there. And yes, that rings a bell with so many people. And I think most people think that. And then that's balanced out by what's happened in America and the impact of Trump. And you think, well, maybe things can change if circumstances conspire to make that change. But just to finish the point and say, things are bad. Things are very bad. That story about Berlin was shared and people were saying, oh my God, that's happening here. No Jews live in Bradford, especially in the area, the northern areas, the Red Wall areas where I live, that segregate Oldham, Rochdale, that segregation is just there. And it's time people did wake up. But as you say, so many people just don't want to know, just completely unaware. But other people, like us, are very angry.
But that you say that report about Berlin. I mean, I remember a great American journalist called Bruce Bauer, who wrote a book called While Europe Slept. And it was all about, he's a gay man, it was living in Holland. It was all about how that was becoming increasingly difficult, that you've got to be careful. Don't show that, don't walk down the street, holding hands. At that particular time, people here still thought that, they were going to be outrageous in Tunbridge Wells, by doing something like this, things have changed entirely. But on that front, when you talk about that, well, where, for example, where is the gay lobby? It's like the feminist argument, again, with sexual harassment. Where are these people? They're not to be found. No. I mean, it's like my enemy's enemy is my friend. That's what I for it is. Speaking of which, it looked like England, or a large part of England, because I went to, had someone sort of come up en masse this week to London to visit for the farmers' protest.
Yeah, this is, of course, in relation to the inheritance tax brought in by Rachel Reeves, who has come out and said that farmers need to pay a tax to fund the NHS, and that the amount raised will be about 560 million from farmers, apparently, according to this new tax. And that will fund the NHS for one day. So it's not really going to do that much for the NHS. So I think a lot of farmers are very outraged by this because, of course, farms they're not quite a business. They're not quite an asset. They're in between. They need to be passed down from family to family in order for the farm to continue. And that needs to happen. And farmers themselves aren't that rich, but the land can can be very wealthy. So that's what this is about. But I think more broadly, kind of some of the scenes that we've seen coming out against the farmers has been very interesting. We've had people like Matthew Wright on LBC saying that this is a punishment from Brexit, basically, that most farmers, most people that live in the countryside voted for Brexit, and therefore they should give up their money to the NHS because it's their fault for the mess we're in. And of course, farmers generally represent, I guess, kind of, they're away from London, they're in the countryside. We've been told for the last couple of years that the countryside is racist, it's white, it's Brexit land. There is a real hatred of this group of people. And of course, they don't necessarily vote Labour. So Labour are quite comfortable with shafting them, giving more money to doctors and nurses and not giving and taking away the money from the farmers. But it's been good to see them come out and protest. It's been quite heartening. Obviously, Jeremy Clarkson's been out and supporting them. But it's, what's happening is devastating. It's quite,
Will this actually make a difference this summer? I mean, I think I should say there's about 14,000 people.
I mean, it's gotten very negative press. I think a lot of people are aware of the issue. I don't know how much the protest will have an impact, but I don't suspect that Labour are going to change on this because I just think they are just making the calculation that it won't affect their vote, so they don't care.
It was remember the Countryside Alliance? Do you remember that? One of the biggest demonstrations in London, 400,000, I believe. And
I was on it.
You went on it. It was an early example of two-tier policing, I seem to remember.
Yeah, but, more broadly, Amy is quite right. Who has Labour been attacking since it came to power? Pensioners, people who send their children to public school, and farmers, the three groups least likely to vote Conservative, three groups who tend to be very traditional symbols of traditional Britain, who like the history and the culture of this country. This is a clear attack on Britain's values and traditions, which are exemplified by farmers who are the very backbone of England and of Britain. We even had a former Tony Blair advisor say he wanted people to treat the farmers as Thatcher had treated the miners, complete disdain, And let's remember, the Guido Fawkes has shown that the actual chief strategist behind this is a Labour socialist who actually believes in collectivization, who believes in the seizing of smallholding farms and having the state take them over. Now, that went down disastrously in the Soviet Union, people being dispossessed of the lands. But this is a hatred for small business owners, is a hatred for the small farm owners. And we don't have the hypothecated tax in this country, right? So the idea that this money is going to go to the NHS just shows you the ideological spin that they're putting on all of this. People, while this money is actually going to pay train drivers, this money is going to pay civil servants who are now the least productive element in society. You're taking money from the people who actually, feed this country. We need to have food security in this land, and you're putting it into the hands. 14 billion pounds of pay rises have gone to the public sector. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, and I mean it's been covered brilliantly, but there's also something else as well that you see, especially if you spend quite a lot of time online, is left-wing commentators making these ridiculous false equivalences, so you don't like Just Stop Oil protesting, but you're okay with farmers, and there is no comparison whatsoever. These people are protesting for their lives, they're protesting for the right to work, and for the right to feed us, as opposed to the Ponsonby Smythes, as I call them, the offspring of the elite, and always these left-wing commentators will support these very privileged people, little green-haired chlamydia will always support those kind of people, and will always fall on the side of the privileged.
But also, the other thing as well, is a small point, but an important one, is that these people could not have been better behaved and could not have been more courteous and could not have been more law-abiding.
Yes.
no trouble.
What was so nice about it was that it was a protest that was about something happening in this country by the people that are most affected by it. Their actual jobs and livelihoods are at stake. And it felt like a proper kind of protest that we don't usually see. We usually see kind of international issues being brought into London, but actually this was something that's happening in this country by people who are genuinely affected by it, and they were very law-abiding, and you got a sense of this kind of real community coming together. And it wasn't about identity; it was about something very real and authentic. And that was what was quite nice about it, actually.
Yes, I went to the Westminster Arms. It's a pub nearby. Afterwards, it was packed to the rafters, as you can imagine. They were all having beer, all packed to the rafters. But I imagine that, the Westminster Arms doesn't see that kind of crowd when it is sort of just stop oil.
No.
I imagine that it doesn't see that at all.
But there's something very, very telling here about the degree to which the Labour Party puts its ideology and vindictiveness ahead of actual common sense and ahead of the data. So, for example, we've in terms of the farmers, we were told, this is only going to affect 500 farms a year, that 75-80% of farmers won't be affected. That's because they're using data from the Treasury, whereas DEFRA, the actual department that deals with farming, says that actually 66% of farmers will be affected by this. 2/3 will be affected by this. And yet they seem so inept. Or are they inept, or are they deliberately ignoring this data? Just as it's come out also this week that 100,000 pensioners are going to be put into poverty because of the winter fuel allowance cut. And again, this was internal modelling that wasn't shared with the wider public. Do they not know about? So they are clearly, they see the data shows how damaging these things are, and they're either suppressing it or they're ignorant of these facts because ideology trumps everything.
Yeah. And they're always talking about assets and land that's worth millions and millions. And of course it isn't, because they can't sell it, and assets, you work with assets. The land is the tool and the tracks of the tools and stuff like that. But the reality is that the average wage is somewhere around about £23,000 a year, and that's tough to live on for a family, I would imagine.
And also a skyrocketing suicide rate amongst farmers, young farmers. I don't mean to pile on the agony there, but it's the case. Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Amy, and thank you we're actually going to carry on a bit for our members, but otherwise, that's it for this week. Have a lovely week, won't you? And we shall see you next time.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.